Today's video is going to be a full stack Next.js application that we are going to build. This is going to be more of a kind of beginner application in which we just build a bare bones application in which we use Next.js, we set up a Postgres database, and then we use Prisma to make queries to that database in which we can create posts, we can delete posts, we can read our posts and do some different things within a full stack application. Now, the prerequisites of this, you should have a good idea of how Next.js works, just generally speaking. You should know React, you should know basic JavaScript. You should probably watch my introduction to Prisma to get an idea of how that works before this. But as long as you kind of have those fundamentals down, you're going to be able to follow this. This is just in JavaScript, and then we use Prisma, Next.js, and Postgres. So it is an introductory full stack application, but there are those things that you should know before getting started here. But without further ado, let's hop into this full stack Next.js application. So here in VS Code, the first thing that we're going to do is run npx create next app at latest. And this will spin up a new Next.js app. So first we have to name it. So I'm going to call this full stack intro. We're not going to use TypeScript. We are not going to use ESLint, not going to use Tailwind, and overall, we are not going to focus much on styles here in this kind of intro here. I just kind of want you to get used to, making a database, connecting to it, and doing that stuff. So we're going to focus on that aspect of things. We're not going to use the src directory. We are going to use the app router, and I do not want to customize the default import alias. So this has created a new project here within my documents full stack intro folder. So I'm going to go file, open, and I'm going to open this folder within VS Code. So this is now just created a new project here in Next.js for this. And what I am going to do now is I am going to add this project to GitHub, which is going to allow us to set up our Vercel Postgres database, because Vercel integrates very nicely with GitHub. And once we push this project to GitHub, we'll be able to kind of set things up and connect it to Vercel very easily. So let's go ahead and I'm going to just do git add, and then I'm going to say git commit initial. How you spell initial? Yeah, initial project commit, I guess. And we just made our commit there. But now to push this, the first thing that we need to do is create a new GitHub project. So here over on GitHub, I'm going to assume that you have a GitHub account. If you don't have a GitHub account, I would recommend creating one. It's free, and you'll probably be using GitHub for your kind of actual professional job and stuff. So this is my GitHub page with my beautiful picture here. And then you could see Ragnar in the background hanging out like a good boy that he definitely isn't, but he likes to pretend sometimes for my videos. But what we're going to do is click on the plus sign here to create new. I'm going to go new repository. I'm going to call this full stack intro and create repository. And then what we're going to do here is copy this command, git remote add origin, and then it's going to be the URL to this project. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it within here, within my terminal. So that's basically connecting this project to my GitHub project. And I'm going to do git push. I'm going to get this error. So then I'm going to copy what it recommends me to actually do, which is git push set upstream origin main. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then this is now pushed my project to GitHub. So if I refresh this page, I should see my Next.js project in here, which I do indeed see my project here. So from here, what we need to do is now connect this to Vercel. So let's go ahead and head over to vercel.com, and I'm already signed in. If you don't have a Vercel account, you'll first need to sign in and also connect your Vercel account to GitHub, but creating a new account is free and connecting it to your GitHub account should be really easy. as soon as you create an account, I believe it will automatically prompt you to connect it to your GitHub. If it doesn't, then Google Connect Vercel account to GitHub, and it's super easy to do. So don't get hung up on this. It's super easy. I would just create a Vercel account for free, connect it to your GitHub, and then once you do, you can go to your overview page here. And once on your overview page, you can do add new project, and then see how it's connected to my GitHub repos here. If you don't see the GitHub repo that you just created, then something went wrong with you connecting it to your Vercel account. So just make sure that's set up correctly. But I'm going to click import here next to my full stack intro project, assuming that you named yours similarly. That's what you would click on as well. So I'm going to import this here, and we're going to click deploy. And the reason we're doing this is because we're going to connect this to a database here in just a second. Let's wait for this for 1 second to deploy here. It should be pretty dang quick. I have a hardwired Ethernet, so this should be pretty quick for me especially. But in the meantime, do you guys want to talk watches? So I've been looking at some different watches that are way too expensive for me to actually afford. But one of these days, we're going to buy a nice watch. Okay, you don't have to listen to me do that anymore. Congratulations, we have deployed this. But we're going to continue to dashboard here. And then what we need to do here is we need to click on storage up here. So we have project, deployments, analytics, speed insights, logs, and storage. So click on storage here. And then once we click on storage, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new database. And for this, we're going to click on Postgres, which is a SQL database that it is in beta here. But I think for demonstration purposes here, it's still going to be fine to use. If you were going to use this in like a fully production application, I would maybe either read more about this on like when they plan to take it out of beta and stuff like that. Maybe you would connect to a different database, but we're going to use Vercel Postgres here as our example. So I'm going to click Postgres and click continue. And then after clicking continue, you'll see this little beta warning here. We're totally fine here to do this in demonstration purposes. Let's create a name for our database. So I'm going to just call this full stack intro. And then I live in Colorado in the United States. So I think Washington might be the closest region, but I'll just select whatever region is closest to you, wherever you are located, and then click create here. And we can now see that we have created our database here, and it gives us our database URL and all that good stuff. But what we're going to do now is we're going to head back to our terminal here for full stack intro, and we now need to install our Vercel CLI, so command line interface. And then the command that we need to run here, I'm going to first do sudo, and then it's going to be npm i-g Vercel at latest. If you're not on a Mac, you might not need to run sudo. But I'm going to do that here. And then I've already typed in my password here today for this, so I didn't need to do it again, but you might need to type in your password. It's just your password to enter your Mac. So you might need to tap that in as well. But this is going to install the Vercel CLI. And then what we need to do here now is we need to run vercel env pull.env.local. So let's go ahead and run this command. And you can see that you're going to get an error that says your code base isn't linked to a project on Vercel. So we need to run vercel link here. And then once we do that, it says set up documents / full stack intro. I'm going to type Y, and then we're going to do code Ryan Solomon. I'm going to link to an existing project, and then it's just going to be full stack intro. And then now we have linked this to Vercel here. So now if we run vercel env pull.env.local, we're going to see that we have now pulled in some environment variables. I'm not going to show you them here, but you should now have a .env.local file here. And we're actually going to want to change this to just a .env file for reasons I will discuss later. And then in your git ignore, just make sure that you have .env in here. And I actually think that .env star is going to be fine here because it will ignore it, but just to play it safe, I want to put .env in here as well. So that's just going to include some environmental variables for our Postgres database. But now that we've successfully kind of linked our Vercel database here to our project, because in our .env file, we have pulled in like our Postgres URL that it gives us that you can see right here, and some different environmental variables. And you can see that it recommends you to pull your environment variables and stuff like that. But we're also going to use a tool called Prisma, which if you haven't seen my intro on Prisma, that might be helpful prior to watching this video. But essentially it's a ORM for databases. So it's a object relational mapper. So it just provides us an easier way to work with our database is effectively what it is. So let's go ahead and get that installed. So we're going to run npm install prisma --save dev. So npm install prisma --save dev. And we're going to run this here. And then that should have installed Prisma. And now to create our Prisma schema, so we need to create basically different tables within our database. And this is what our schema is going to represent. We're going to create within our app folder, we're going to go new file, and then we're going to go schema.prisma is what we're going to create. And this is a new Prisma schema folder. And then within this folder, we're going to add a couple of different database models. And we are in particular going to add a host and a user model. And the models that we're going to add are actually going to come from this vercel.com/guides/Next.js Prisma Postgres, this article here. And what we're going to do here is copy this Prisma schema from this article. And then we're going to come back and paste this schema into our page. So basically what we've done here is we've told Prisma that we are going to be using Postgres as our database provider. And then here it's using our .env file, Postgres Prisma URL, which we pulled in for our env file here with our Vercel command line tool is what we pulled those env variables in. So we already have this in our env file as well as this right here. And then we're also creating two different tables in our database, a post table that has an ID, a title, content, published, author, author ID. And then we also have a user table, which has ID, name, email, created at, so on and so forth. So these represent different tables within our database that will be created within Postgres here. So to actually create these tables, what we then need to do is we need to create a new migration for our database, which in migration is effectively just going to be a different version of our database. So to do this, we're going to run the command npx prisma db push. And then when running this command, you should see your database is now in sync with your Prisma schema, and it should say generated the Prisma client as well. So I'm going to clear this, and when we go back to our Vercel project, you should see that for your database here, make sure that under projects, you see full stack intro here. And then you see the different environment variables. If you don't see that, you can click connect project and make sure and select your project here and make sure it's connected. And then if you do that, then you might need to rerun the Vercel env pull.env just to make sure that you have those environmental variables. Because I have had times to where I run npx prisma db push and then I get an error, and it's because I don't have my environment variables. So just make sure that your project is linked there, and then you do Vercel env pull, and then that should make things be set up correctly for you to run npx prisma db push here. All right. But with that, we have now created our new tables within Prisma here. So now let's go ahead, and since we have set up our new database, we can now run npx Prisma Studio. And that is basically going to open up a web browser that shows us our kind of actual database that we've created. So I'm going to take this over here, and this is me running this at localhost 5555. So you see that I now have two models, a post model and a user model. And now that we have these models, we can then actually go and create a new post as well as a new user. So let's go ahead and do that now. So the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to create a user. So I'm going to click on user here within all models. And when this pops up, I'm going to click on add record. And let me actually adjust this just a bit so you can see where I'm at. So I'm still just in my Prisma Studio here. And then I'm going to click on add record. And then for this, it's automatically going to generate a user ID here, but we want to put in a name. So I'm just going to use myself as this user here. So Ryan, and then my email is it's Ryan at codeorion.io. And also, side note, I'm thinking about maybe doing some sort of tutoring or coaching or something like that on a weekly basis, like just one-on-one with people. So if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out at this email. This is legitimately my email, but still something I'm kind of considering. And then it's automatically going to create a created at here, and as well as an updated at. So I'm going to go save one change here. And now I'm going to go back. So I'm going to X out of this. I'm going to go to my posts, and I'm going to create a post. So I'm going to add a record here. And this, we're doing this through this kind of graphical interface that Prisma Studio gives us, but we are legitimately adding users and posts to our Postgres database right now. Later, we will do this programmatically using JavaScript, but we are legitimately writing to our database right now. So here, let's create a post. So I'm going to just name this. I'm going to just say post 1. And for content, I'm going to say post 1 content. This is my content. And for a user, I'm going to click on user there, and I'm going to check Ryan. And then I am going to save this change. And let me make sure that that saved for user. So yeah, that should be saved for the user. So we have now created a new post and a new user. So this, my user that I created, Ryan, it now has one post here, which is my post that we just created. Okay, so you should have a user linked to a post. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. I'm not going to save this change. I'm going to discard changes. So I'm going to exit this. And then now what we want to do is start interacting with this programmatically using different route handlers and stuff like that within Next.js. So let's head back to VS Code. And what we're going to do here first is we're going to install the Prisma client. So like I said earlier, Prisma is this ORM, object relational mapper, that allows us to work with our database a little bit easier. And the Prisma client that we're going to install allows us to kind of use this ORM. So we're going to do npm install at Prisma /client. So I'm going to install this here. And then after we install this client, what we need to do is, because the Prisma client is tailored to our own schema, we need to update the Prisma client every time we change our schema. So what we need to do now is run the command npx Prisma generate. And when doing this, we can see that they generated the Prisma client, and it says we can import Prisma from Prisma client and call the new Prisma client here below. So now that we have this created, what we're going to do is we're going to create a lib folder, and we are going to create a prisma.js file within that folder. So I think that I'm going to do this I'm going to do outside of my app. So I'm going to just click on new folder here within my full stack intro folder. And I'm going to just call this lib. And then I'm going to create a new file within that. And it's just going to be prisma.js. And if you guys want videos in TypeScript in the future, let me know. I tend to do JavaScript just because it's more like, if you know TypeScript, you could do this project in TypeScript. It's no problem. I just want to make sure this is accessible to people that might only know JavaScript, but we can do some TypeScript stuff in the future as well. But with this, within this Prisma.js folder, we are going to basically create a wrapper around the Prisma client that basically kind of helps us out a little bit. So we are going to import the Prisma client from @Prisma client. And then following this, we're going to set a variable called Prisma here. We're just going to initialize this variable. And then I'm going to say if process.env.nodenv is equal to production, then we're going to say that the Prisma variable is equal to a new Prisma client. Else, if we're not in production, then what we're going to do is if not global dot Prisma, if there's not a global Prisma, then set a global.prisma is equal to a new Prisma client. And then outside of that if block, we're going to say Prisma is equal to global.Prisma. And then we're going to export default Prisma here. So this is basically just doing some checks. Like if we're in production, then set our Prisma to be a new Prisma client. But if that's not true and we don't have a global Prisma, then set a global Prisma with a new Prisma client. Else just set Prisma to our existing global Prisma. And then we're going to export this Prisma. So then we're going to use this Prisma client everywhere else in our app. And if I just said Prisma about 800 times, I apologize. But hopefully this kind of makes sense what we're doing here. So now that we've kind of updated this, what we're going to do now is we're actually going to query our database and use our Prisma client within our actual app. So we are going to head over to our app folder here. I'm going to click on page.js. And right now, this is just like a initial Next.js project. So I'm going to delete all of this here. So I'm going to remove all this and I'm going to do an H1 and let me change this to JSX instead of just JS, because then it's going to give me better code completion. So I'm going to do H1 here and I'm going to just say feed. And now what we need to do is we need to make a query to our database to get all of our posts and then display our posts on our homepage. So if we go back here and I go to localhost 3000, you're just going to see this H1 with feed. As you can see here, we just have feed at localhost 3000. So with this, we want to actually make a request to our database to get all of our posts and then render them out within this page. So now here within our homepage, all we need to do is make a request to our database. And since this is server rendered here, this is a server component, we can just make that request to our database directly to get all of our posts. So the way that we can do this is I can create an async function get posts. And what this is going to do is I'm going to say const, I'm going to say posts is equal to, I'm going to await, and I need to import our Prisma client here. So first I'm going to go import Prisma from @lib/Prisma. And I'm going to say const post is equal to await Prisma.post.find many. So this is going to get all of our posts, and I'm going to set a where clause. So this is like a SQL where clause. I'm going to say where, and it's basically just saying you want to do a condition for your query to your database. I'm going to say where published is set to true. And then I'm also going to need to include, and if this is a little bit, the syntax might be a little bit confusing. You might not have seen this before. Prisma documents as well. You'll definitely get used to it the more you use it. So I wouldn't worry too much about it, but I'm going to do include. I'm going to say author, and then I'm going to select, and I'm going to say name is true because I want to get the name of the author for all my posts. And then here I can just do return posts. And I could have done like just return await this, but I think this is even more clear. So I'm going to make my function home here. I'm going to export default async function, and I'm going to say const posts is equal to await, and I'm going to call get posts. And all I'm going to do here is console.log my posts. And I console log an object because it will set the property of this object to posts, and then the value will be all my posts here. It just gives me a label for my console log, which I really like to do. So if I come back and I refresh this page, we shouldn't see any differences. And when I open my terminal, what you're going to actually see here is I have console logged my posts, but it's an empty array here. So why might this not be returning my posts? Well, this where clause, it's only going to return published posts. So if we go back to our Prisma Studio, what we're going to see is that if we look at our post that we have in here, we're going to see that published is false. So we actually need to make sure that this is a published post here. So I'm going to click on this, and then I believe I can change this to true, and then I'm going to save change. And now this should be a published post. So if I come back, I'm just going to refresh the page. And then if I open this, I now see I have my one post here, and it has post one content. This is my content. Published is true. And then it has my author. It renders as an object here because if you stringify an object, it's just going to kind of turn up as this. So we have successfully gotten our post from our database that we created using our Prisma Studio here. So now all we need to do is create a post component, and then we can map over our posts and render them just how you usually would in React.js. So what we're going to do here is my post, it's going to have a title, content, an ID, as well as I think I'm going to pass in the author name as well. So I'm going to create within my app a folder called components. And then within my components folder, I'm going to go new file, and I'm going to just do post.jsx, and I'm going to export a default function post. And this post component is going to accept an ID, a title, content, and an author name prop. And all we're going to do here is return something super easy. Let's just return like a div that has maybe like an H4 where we have our title. And then we could do a p tag that has our content. And then we could do maybe we'll do above the H4, we'll do an H3 with the author name. And you could set this up however you want. This is not particularly important. And then I guess I don't need the ID right now, but we're still going to pass the ID because we're also going to implement deleting posts here in the future. So we are going to use this, but for now, we're just going to not use that prop, which should be just fine. And then so we can see this, I'm going to just put a style prop on here. Border, let's just do 1 pixel solid white. And then let's also just add some padding here. of maybe something like, I don't know, 15 pixels. So now that we have this within our page.jsx, I can now take my posts and I can map over them just how you would in React. And we can return a post component here, imported from our components/post. And then what we need to do on this component, we need to set a key to be post.id. And then we're going to set ID is equal to post.id. And then we're going to set title is equal to post.title. And then content is equal to post.content. And then author name is equal post dot, I think author dot name. I think that's correct, but we'll know real quick if we get like an error for this. And I'm going to remove my post console.log. So if I save this and we head back, we do indeed see our one post down here. Now let me adjust this a little bit. Let's adjust the page.module.css. This has space between. Let's just do center so we can see it on our page a little bit better. And that looks a little gross. So within our post, let's also add a little bit of margin. So maybe just like something like margin is, let's do 10 pixels top and bottom, 0 pixels left and right. And then if we come back, we do indeed see our feed as well as our post. So this is our post from our database that we just created, and we're making our request to our database within our page.jsx file here with our get post function using prisma.post.find many. So if you've made it this far, you have successfully set up a Postgres database, and you've also, within the back end of your Next.js application here within this server component, you've queried your database, you've gotten some data from it, and you've shown that data in your UI. Like, this is, technically speaking, we have already built a full stack application here. We set up a database and we're using that within our UI. So congratulations if this is one of the first kind of full stack apps that you've created, then you're well on your way to being a full stack engineer here. So pretty cool. I don't know. I've been doing the programming thing for a handful of years now, and I still think it's cool to like connect to databases and stuff like this, which I guess that's a sign that I am doing the right profession if I find this cool. So with that, let's go ahead and let's just add another post here within Prisma, just so we have a couple of different posts. So let's add another record. For title, we're going to be super creative here, and I'm going to do post 2. And then I'm going to say post to content. This is post 2's content. And then we are going to publish this. And then I'm going to set the user to be Ryan right here. And then I'm going to save that change. And then I've basically just written another post to my database. And if we come back here, actually, we want to come back to our localhost. If I refresh this page, you're now going to see post 2 shows up. And yes, the styling here is pretty gross, but we're not really focusing on that. We're focusing on full stack app in Next.js with a Postgres database and using the Prisma ORM. So now that we have the ability to have our different posts here and we can get those from our database, let's also cover creating a post from our database or creating a post within our database. So the way that we do this here is going to be a little bit different. We're actually going to set up a route handler in Next.js, because to create a post, it's probably going to have to be a client component, because that component is going to have like some sort of input on our page. So the user can type in the title of the post, the content of the post, and we might also allow them to type in the author of the post, although I'm not planning to implement authentication in this app yet. I think we will in the future, but not in this kind of first video here. So we might use an author, we might not. I'll surprise you here in a sec. But what we do want to do is set up a way for creating posts within our actual database here. So what we're going to do for that is we're going to have to let's create another page here where they can add a post. So within Next.js, within our app router, let's go new folder, and I'm going to do add post. And in this folder, I'm going to add a new file, and it's going to be a page.jsx file. I'm going to export a default function called add post. And this is going to be a client component here. So we'll touch on that in a second, but I'm just doing H1 and it's going to say add post. And then we are also going to have a form here to add a post. And when we click on the submit button of our form, we're going to make a request, a client request to our backend in Next.js. So we're going to use a route handler, and then we're going to create a post within our database. So for this add post, like I said, it is going to be a client component here. So at the top of the file, we need to put use client, and we should probably also, like on my page.jsx page, I'm going to put maybe below my posts, maybe above my post, I'll put let's just do Next.js link. So I'm going to do link from next link. I'm going to say add post, and I'm going to set an href, and that is going to equal / add hyphen post. So that's going to match our add post here within our app router, because Next.js does file-based routing. So anytime you create a new folder with a page.jsx, you've effectively created a new public route with a route titled whatever your folder is titled. So we created a new route called add post. So we're going to link to that here within our page. So wow, this is probably the most beautiful UX I've seen. So let's click on add post here, and we see my H1 with add post. But let's go ahead and also use my page.module.css file within this page. So let's import styles from, and I think I can do at app / page.module.css. And then we're going to say class name is equal to styles.main, and that should at least center things in the page so you can see those a little bit better, which it does indeed do here. So this is looking fantastic, but now we need to do a form. And because I'm lazy, let's go to ChatGPT and have ChatGPT create us a form component. Create me a form component within React.js. This component should have an input where user types in a title, and input where user types in content, and a submit button. So here it gives us a form component. It says create new post, and we could create this like a new component within our actual page here. But I think that we're fine to actually I'm going to copy this form right here, and then I'm going to paste this under add post. I know that formatting looks a little gross here, but I just wanted this to be a bare bones project, so we didn't install Prettier, which would definitely help here. So I added this form, but now we also need to add this logic here. So let's go ahead and grab all of this. And if you want to grab this from my GitHub, you totally can. I think that would be a perfectly reasonable thing to do here, considering I'm just taking it from ChatGPT. And you could also take it from ChatGPT to give yourself some more practice using it. I think that a modern programmer should be using as many AI tools as possible. So with this, let's see what we've done here. So we have a form in which our onSubmit calls our handle submit function. We have a title in which when our title changes, we're going to call handle title change, which is just going to set our title to our event.target.value. Same thing we do for handle content change for this right here. Then we have a button with type submit. So this actually looks pretty dang good here. It wants me to, you can perform similar actions. So let's just delete all this. So right within this handle submit function here, this is where we're going to make a request to our backend endpoint, which we will create here in just a second. But let's first see what the UI looks like for this within our add post page. So let's go back to localhost, and I say use state is not defined. So we need to make sure we're importing use state from React here. And then we see, wow, this is probably the most beautiful form I've seen. I don't know about you guys, but I really like this UI. So with that, we have our beautiful form here. So now we just need to handle clicking on this submit button. And when we click submit, we want to be able to submit something to our database. So the way that we can do this is I need to create an API route that we can make a request to. So the way that we can do this within Next.js is within my app folder, I'm going to create a new folder called API. And then within my API folder, I'm going to create another new folder in which this is just going to be, maybe I'll just call this post. Maybe add post would make more sense. Maybe I'll do add post. And then within my add post folder, I'm going to add a route.js file. So now what we need to do is create our route handler. So if someone makes a post request to this endpoint, and our endpoint is going to be /API/add post, we need to handle post request here. So the way that we can do this is I need to export an async function called post, and it's going to take it's going to accept our request as a parameter here. And then within this add post function, let's say const res is equal to await request.json here. And we're going to return a next response.json with maybe we'll set our data to be our res. But I also want to just console log our res here within our post request route handler. And I also need to import next response here. So up top, I'm going to do import next response from next/server. So now we've created a route handler at /API/add-post. And if we make a post request to this route handler, it's not really going to do a ton for us yet, but it is going to just console log the request that we make, and then it's just going to return a next response. But within this route handler, what we're actually going to want to do is we're going to actually want to write our post to our database using the Prisma client. So before we do that, let's just make sure that we're console logging the right request here. So within my add post function, in this handle submit, what we need to do is make a client request to our backend endpoint. So what we can do here is we can do try. So we'll do this within a try catch block. And I'm going to want to make this, I think I'm going to want to make this an async. Yeah, I guess I will. I don't know if I really need to, but I will do that for now. And I'll do try, and we'll do fetch. And what are we going to fetch? Well, we're going to fetch our /API/add-post. And then as a option to our fetch request, we need to set our method is equal to post. And we're going to also set headers, in which that's going to be an object. And we're going to set our content type is set to application/JSON. And I think I spelled that correctly. And then after our headers, we are also going to set our body is going to be JSON.stringify. And then we're going to pass in our title as well as our content here as the body of our request. So we're going to make a fetch request to API/add post right here that we just made, this route handler. It's going to be a post method with content type. And let me actually move this to a new line and move this to a new line. Content type is application JSON, and then the body is going to be JSON stringify, our title as well as our content that we get from our state within this add post component here. And then we're also going to want to do catch an error, and then let's just console.error this error if something bad occurs. So with that, that should make a request to our API endpoint, and our endpoint, it should console log this request here. So let's go back and I'm going to inspect here. I'm going to go to my network tab because I want to see this request occur. And for this title, I'm going to say post. I think this should be our third post now. And I'm going to say post 3 content, blah, blah, whatever. And then I'm going to click submit. So status of 200 at /add post here. And if we preview it, it returned data with post 3 content, blah, blah, whatever. Title is post 3. So we successfully made a request to our backend endpoint here, in which if I look at the console, I should see title is post 3, content is post 3, blah, 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 whatever. So we successfully made our request to our endpoint. But now all we need to do is we just need to write this post to our database. So what we can do here is, now that we have our title and our content within our res here, and I think I can do const title and content is equal to our response. And let me make sure, yeah, that should work. All we need to do is say const result is equal to await Prisma. So I'm going to import Prisma from lib/Prisma. Then I'm going to do .post.create, call this function, pass in an object in which I'm going to set the data of this post to be an object in which I'm going to just set the title is going to be title. And then the content is going to be, oh, I don't need to do this. Let's use modern JavaScript. I'm going to set title is the title using objects shorthand properties, and content is content. And then I also want to set a author, but we're just going to hard code an author right now. In the future, when we have authentication, we might add an author differently, but right now let's just hard code an author. So author is a property in which I'm going to create an author. Let's just set a name, and I'm going to just set it to Ryan. So all the author names are going to be hard coded as Ryan. We can change this. Like if you added authentication, once they sign in, they give you the name. So we could just use whatever the session name is, and we might very well do that in the future. But right now, let's just kind of hard code this in here. And then we're just going to return, instead of data is our res, let's just return our result here. So let's go ahead and see if this works now. So I'm going to clear my network. I'm going to say post 3 content, and then I'm going to click submit. So we get a 200 here. Let's see if we actually added this to our database. So let's go back to our Prisma Studio and let me refresh this. And we do see we have now added post 3 here, except we did not add that it was a published post. So we need to change that in our request here, but we can see that we've added our 3rd post here and our user. It's a new Ryan here, which is totally fine. So it created this user with an auto-generated ID and a name of lowercase Ryan. And then I'm going to set this to true here. So I'm going to just update it manually. But in our actual post request, what we can do is we can set published is equal to true. And then I think that should automatically publish a post. So let's go ahead and create post 4 here. So post 4, we'll say post for content. And then let's go ahead and submit this. And then if I go back to my database and I refresh it, you should see post 4 with post 4 content and published is true. And then also within our UI here, we should be able to go back to our feed and see our posts. So let me go back, and within our add post page, let's add a link to view our feed. So we're going to do something really gross here again. Import link from next link. I'm going to say view feed. And this is just going to have an href that is going to be set to / here. And then if I go back, I should be able to click on view feed. And then you see our 4 different posts. But one thing I want to show you here is, let's go back to our add post. And I know this looks particularly awesome, but let's go back to our add post here. And let's go ahead and add post 5. I'm going to say post 5 content. And we've clicked submit. But now if I go to my view feed, you can see I only have 4 posts. But then if I refresh, I now have my 5th post, which what's going on here is I'm returning, when I go back to my feed, I'm returning my cached data. It's not automatically refreshing this page after I add a post. And we definitely don't want that. Like if a user added a post, they should see the updated post in their feed right away. So let's now go ahead and fix that. So I believe one way that we can fix this is if we go back to VS Code and we look at our handle submit function within add post, I think that what we can do is we can await this fetch here. And then after this fetch takes place, so once we await it here in this try block, that will assume that everything works successfully and we have added a post. I believe what we can do is we can import use router from, I don't think it's next router. I think it's actually next navigation here. And then we can set a const router is equal to use router. And then once we successfully make this post here, I believe we can just do router dot refresh. Now, I'm sure there's other ways that we could solve this issue. This is just one way that I kind of know off the top of my head here, but I would say if you're kind of solving this in a professional application, I might just look around for, spend 10 minutes looking around and seeing other solutions to this and maybe see what's best for your use case here. But now that I've added this, let's go ahead. So we have 5 posts here. Let's go ahead and add another post. So I'm going to add post 6 and I'm going to go post 6 content, and let's go ahead and submit this here. And if I view my feed now, I'm hoping that we see that 6th post, and we do indeed see it. So it looks like that refreshing the router there, it did indeed solve our issue there of not seeing the post. So I think with that, maybe the final thing to do here is add an ability to delete these posts here. So then we can create posts in our database, we can delete them, we can get our posts, and honestly, that should give you like a good kind of bare bones project to learn a lot of different things when building a full stack app in Next.js. So let's go ahead and add this delete functionality. So for this, I'm going to go to our page.jsx in just our root application, I'm going to close some of these files up here. And I see that that's kind of off the screen for you, but I'm just making sure that just my page.jsx file is open in my like file navigator up top. But with that, what we want to do is we want to add, so to our post here, I think what we want to do is add a button for deleting our post based on our ID here. So right now, since we're not making this post a client component, this is a server component, because in Next.js 13, your React components are going to be rendered on the server rather than on the client. And since this is the case, I wouldn't be able to make like a button that the user can click on and then make a backend request to our database to delete this post, as there has to be some like a user interaction there on the client. So since we need an interactive button component, let's go ahead in our components page. Let's create a client component that's a button that's going to delete our posts. And that will prevent us from needing to make this entire post a client component. We can just have like a little button client component within the server component. And this is something that I believe Dan Aramov has talked about, on how within your server components, you can open up these little kind of holes of client components to kind of fill in, rather than making the entire server component a client component, which can improve your performance by doing that. So within components, let's do a new file, and let's just go delete post button.jsx, and then let's first use client as a string at the top, and let's export a default function called delete post button, and then it is going to take the post ID as a prop. And then what we're going to do here is we're just going to return a normal button, and let's just put an X here maybe. I guess we'll put delete post. That'll work too. And then for the on click here, I'm going to pass a function, and I'm just going to say handle click. So right here, I'm going to create a function, and it's going to be an async function handle click. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a request to our database here, a fetch request that is going to delete our post. And this fetch request should include the ID of the post in the request itself, so we can use that ID to delete the specific post within our database. So to do this, we can do await fetch, and then we're going to do this to API /post/ and then we can just add a dynamic parameter here. And I need to make these backticks to make this a template string in JavaScript, but we can just do the post ID here. And then as a second argument here, we need to do a method of delete, because we're going to make a delete request here. And then also, after we delete a post, we are going to want to refresh our router again, so the post on the page is immediately removed. So let's go ahead and do the same kind of trick, I guess, that we did earlier, in which we import use router from next navigation, and make sure it's next navigation and not next whatever other library it suggested. And then I'm going to say const router is equal to use router, and I'm going to call that function. And then after we await this fetch, and we can also put this in a try catch block and at least do a little bit of error handling here. So we can try this, and then if it's successful, we will do router.refresh. But if there's an error, we're going to catch that error, and we'll just console.error that error. So what we've done here is we've created a client component saying use client, in which we have imported our router so we can refresh after we make a delete request to API /post/ some dynamic post ID. So now that we have this in place, what we need to do is we need to create this API route. So the way that we can do this is, so since I made this API /post/ some dynamic route, within my API folder here, I need to do a new folder that is called post, and then I need to do a dynamic route. So I can add another new folder and I can use the square bracket syntax and I can do ID. So this is going to create a dynamic route, and then within my ID folder, I need to create a route.js. So this is going to create a new route at API /post/ some dynamic ID here. And then for my post handler, what we need to do is export default function delete. And then that is going to take a request, and it's also going to have our params. Since it's a dynamic route, it should include a param that has an ID that's the ID of our post we want to delete. So I'm going to say const ID is equal to params.id. And if we would have named our post /ID, if this would have been, post / slug, then we would have accessed params.slug. But here we called it ID. So in our params, our second argument to our delete request, we can access ID. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I am just going to, I think maybe at the start, we will just console log the ID to make sure that things look like they're working correctly. And then from there, we can just return a next response. And I guess we will do .json and then pass in our request. I think we're going to change this here in a second, so this doesn't really matter. I just want to console log the ID and make sure that we are making this request to our backend correctly here. So now this delete post function, or this delete post component, should make a delete request once we click this delete post button, and it should do this to our dynamic route in which we console log the ID here within our parameters. So within our post, all we need to do is add our delete post client component here. And then I need to set my post ID is equal to my ID. And if we go back to our UI here, we should see delete post. And if I click delete post here, you see nothing happens, but that is expected. We don't really actually do anything. But I should see my ID within my console, but you see I actually get an error saying export a named export for each HTTP method. So I shouldn't have done an export default function. I should have just done export function here. So let me go ahead and try this again. Delete post, come back, and I do see I have my post ID here. So that's a little bit of a kind of a gotcha there. It should just be export function, not export default function. So now that I have my ID here, we can go ahead and use our Prisma client to actually delete this post. So we want to import Prisma from @lib/Prisma. And then now that we have this ID here of our post, and we get that from our dynamic params, we can say const post is equal to await Prisma.post.delete, where our ID is equal to this ID right here. And I need to export an async function so I can use await right here. And then we can pass our post into our response.json here. So I think this is all the code we need here to delete this post. So we're just using Prisma, we're accessing our post, and we're deleting the post where the ID is equal to this ID from our params here. So let's go ahead and let's open up our network tab to see this happen. If I click delete post 6, you should see, so my post 6 is now gone. And if I preview this, you can see that I returned a post from that request. and it says post 6, it has the ID, author ID, so on and so forth. So it looks like it makes that request and returns a response correctly. And it looks like that this post is deleted here. And if I look at my Prisma Studio, I should see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 posts here. So that is how you can set up a full stack Next.js application using Prisma and Postgres, allowing you to add posts, delete them, and perform some different refreshes of your page and all that stuff. So hopefully you enjoyed this kind of beginner introduction to building full stack apps in Next.js. Future videos will cover Next.js authentication as well as more kind of full-fledged full stack applications, but hopefully this was a helpful introductory video for you, and I'll see you in that next one.